Which leads me to, if I may pivot now to another area that you've written a lot about. A lot of what we've been saying is people ought to know what has really happened. In other words, history.
Yes.
If you're to draw the right lessons out of it, and if you're to avoid making the worst mistakes. That comes to education. And it seems to me that if history is taught at all, it's often taught very badly, but it's not just history. You've recently completed a book on the shutting down of the grammar schools in England and the consequences for British education of that decision. What exactly were? Because I've never fully.
Well, the term is the term in England is specific. I mean, in the United States, it means something completely different. For instance, it's a sort of infant school. The grammar schools were, and they existed in this form from about 1944 to about 1970. They were state schools, as they run largely by local authorities, which were selective on the basis of academic ability, and they selected at the age of 11, which meant that it didn't matter how poor you were, you could get, if you showed yourself to be able to benefit from it, you could get a superb secondary education, very rigorous, and they became politically unpopular because they became quite hard to get into for reasons. Fundamentally, there was a huge baby bulge after the Second World War, which increased the pressure on places there. And so they didn't increase the number of schools to cope with this. And so people began to find that their children were being rejected for grammar schools when they thought they should get in. And the feeling of injustice made them politically unpopular. And so they were got rid of. That's the simplest version of the story. I've often said that in the modern world, people are taught what to think rather than how to think. I think part of the idea of those who wanted to get rid of the grammar schools, because there was a big egalitarian campaign to get rid of them, which succeeded, was that they wanted, particularly a man called Graham Savage, to recreate in Britain the American high school system. And the American high schools, very interestingly, are really a socialization enterprise. They're basically designed to create Americans. Education in America starts at college when you've finished high school. And what we now have in this country is a system of high schools in which people are socialized. And what are they socialized in? They're socialized in what you might call the modern ideology. But one of the things about grammar schools, as they were, a few vestigial ones exist, but they're not really what they used to be, was that they were incredibly rigorous about the teaching of knowledge. And when people say, well, how would you, if you want people taught how to think, how would you do that? I say, well, fundamentally, you start with the knowledge. So if you're learning a language, you'll get nowhere unless you learn the grammar and the vocabulary. The hard, horrible slog of those things are the only way you will ever successfully learn a language, unless you learn it as a child from listening. And the same with the sciences, the hard sciences, and with history. If you don't know, then you can't begin to think. If you don't know, you can't question what people tell you and say, well, then shall I actually find out if the basis of this is so? And I think by destroying the grammar schools, we destroyed rigor in schools to such an extent that it's very rare now to find people who have the basis of knowledge which enables them to understand, to criticize their own positions and those of others, and to think. This is missing from our society. We now have for instance, on so many subjects, an almost totally unanimous parliament. We have an almost totally unanimous civil service. We have an almost totally unanimous teaching profession. We have an almost totally unanimous media on almost all major subjects. That should not be. In a thinking society, there should be dissent, and it should be respected. Now, I find myself, to my total astonishment, a dissenter on several major subjects now. And what I notice is that the response to dissent is increasingly hostility. Why don't you shut up? The accusations that I'm a war crimes denier, people openly accuse me of being in the pay of the Russian government, all kinds of bilge, anything but rational arguments saying, okay, let's discuss this. What's your point? I don't get that at all, really. Yeah. And I think that's a result of having a society which is fundamentally ignorant and therefore afraid of knowledge which it has not been told is true.
And an inability, perhaps, to push back on the basis of facts. So facts become...
Well, but not
wokeism
even,
collapses when it hits facts.
Interested.
Yeah.
Not even taught to value them, not having had that amazing discovery. You read the book, the footnote says, this. You trace the footnote, you find the origin. I never knew that. And this is one of the great joys of life, is the discovery of things you didn't know. But most people are protected against it because their minds are closed by the security of the ideology in which they live. And if ever it's challenged, then everyone gathers around and shouts at the person who challenges it. And they're not compelled to go look at the footnotes. So they never find out.
So you used the term, I think, the schools basically now are an exercise in socialising people according to
I believe increasingly so. It's very hard. I mean, I have to say this is conjecture, what they call stochastic, I believe, in modern pseudoscience, guesswork, because you cannot get inside these places. How would you actually go and examine the workings of a modern British state school? If you got permission to go and observe what was going on, would you see what was normally going on, or would it be prepared for you? If you could get permission at all. I know this is a different subject slightly, but a couple of teachers a few years ago cooperated with the television company and secretly filmed what was going on in their classrooms, which was in many cases disorder. And they were actually condemned by the teaching profession for doing this.